The moment you start defending yourself, you've already admitted weakness. That's what Machiavelli would whisper from the shadows. Not because defense is wrong, but because it reveals something far more dangerous. That you care how you're being perceived. That you need their approval. That your value is hanging on the edge of someone else's opinion. This is the first trick Machiavelli would flip to seize power in a conversation, a negotiation, a court, or even a betrayal. He would never defend himself, because defending is explaining, and explaining is begging. Machiavelli understood the brutal psychology of perception. In the game of power, people believe what they perceive, not what's true. And the moment you start trying to correct that perception, you're telling the world, you control the narrative, not me. It's the trap that brings down the powerful. They start justifying themselves, clarifying, correcting, thinking they're winning trust when in reality, they're showing their cracks. Machiavelli saw this fatal mistake destroy princes, popes, and generals alike. The desire to explain yourself is rooted in ego and insecurity. Both are liabilities in the pursuit of power. So what did Machiavelli do instead? He let silence do the killing. Let's imagine the scenario. You're accused. Falsely, publicly. Maybe your loyalty is questioned, your competence is doubted, or your motives are misrepresented. The average person's reflex? That's not true. I didn't mean it like that. And they rush to the front lines, bleeding trust, energy, and dignity. But Machiavelli, he'd lean back, watch, smile maybe, and wait for the accuser to overplay their hand. Because here's the first truth. He who is loudest in his defense exposes himself as already defeated. Silence terrifies people. It forces them to fill in the blanks, to doubt their own certainty, to imagine you're operating at a level they can't read yet. And in that vacuum, Machiavelli found power. While others were fighting for clarity, he mastered ambiguity. Now here's why this works at a psychological level. People instinctively chase certainty, especially in social situations. When you don't give them that certainty, they feel off balance. They overthink. They second guess. If you defend yourself too fast, they smell desperation. But if you stay calm, untouched, above it all, you confuse them, and confusion weakens resolve. Suddenly, their attack starts to feel unfounded, even if it was founded. That's the first flip. But it doesn't stop there. Because Machiavelli wasn't just silent, he redirected. If an accusation came, he wouldn't push back, he'd push sideways. He'd subtly turn attention to a greater threat, or to his accuser's credibility, or to the outcomes of his actions rather than the intentions. It's not, I didn't do that. It's, look what was achieved. Let's say you're accused of manipulating someone. Don't say, I wasn't manipulating. Say, I got the result no one else could. Don't play the moral game. Play the outcome game. Machiavelli didn't argue ethics. He argued results. Because results speak louder than any denial. And if someone pressed him, he'd use another dark weapon, strategic misdirection. He'd reframe the narrative, not challenge it directly. Someone says, you betrayed your ally. Machiavelli's mind replies, call it betrayal. I call it foresight. You call it disloyalty. I call it protecting the state. By renaming the action, you reclaim the frame. And whoever owns the frame owns the truth. But what if the silence starts costing you? What if people believe the lie, spread it, and you start to lose influence? Then Machiavelli would apply his final trick, delegated vindication. He wouldn't defend himself. He'd let others do it. Because it always sounds more powerful when someone else says you're innocent, when someone else calls out the smear, when someone else insists you were right all along. That's the power of using perception like a weapon. You don't clean your name. You make others desperate to clean it for you. You become too high to kneel in defense. And that makes people elevate you further. Machiavelli wrote, it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But what he meant wasn't cold-hearted tyranny. It was a principle of perception. Those who fear losing your approval won't question your character. But if you keep defending yourself, you become small, familiar, touchable. Now think, why do world leaders, billionaires, and psychological manipulators avoid defending themselves, even when caught red-handed? Because they know the moment they do, they reduce themselves to the level of the accuser. They humanize the attack. Machiavelli would rather be hated than pitied. rather be misunderstood than trivialized. When someone tried to shame him, he leaned into it. When someone tried to mock him, he smirked. And when someone tried to destroy his name, he vanished into history, only to come back centuries later, feared, studied, and obeyed. So what do you do now? Stop justifying yourself to people who don't matter. Stop correcting lies that weren't worth your breath. Stop making your image everyone's business. Instead, let your results be your loudest defense. Let your silence trigger confusion. Let your enemies overextend while you watch from above. Let your allies speak your truth. And if you have none, build results so powerful even your enemies choke on them. Because in the end, the person who doesn't flinch, who doesn't explain, who doesn't beg to be understood, is the one everyone ends up fearing the most. Machiavelli didn't teach us to win arguments. He taught us to own the stage so completely that the argument becomes irrelevant. Here's the twisted beauty of never defending yourself. You don't just avoid losing power, you create a mystique, a myth. You become a figure people talk about instead of someone they talk to. You remove yourself from the battlefield entirely and start playing in the heavens. Because when you stop answering, people stop attacking. Not because you've proven them wrong, but because you've become unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. Machiavelli would study those who rose to greatness and notice a curious pattern. The most dangerous men didn't chase vindication. They cultivated confusion. They let the world guess. And in that guessing, enemies made mistakes, followers built fantasies, and rivals spent more time reacting than acting. Defending yourself is a reaction, and reaction is a form of obedience. Let that land. Every time you respond to an accusation, you admit that someone else's opinion has authority over your reputation. You admit that you're not the source of your own power, that your identity is up for public vote. And once that happens, you're not feared. You're not respected. You're a product to be debated. But Machiavelli played a different game. He withheld. He wasn't interested in being liked or even understood. He was interested in being obeyed. And people don't obey the person who explains. They obey the one who moves like a shadow, whose intentions are never fully revealed, whose motives can't be boxed in. So here's what Machiavelli would do when his name was under fire. He would disappear for a moment, then reappear somewhere stronger. Let's break that down. Imagine someone launches a rumor, a damaging one. Instead of countering it directly, you vanish. No post, no apology, no reaction, no let me clarify what really happened, just silence. But then you re-enter the stage, not with a speech, but with a win. A powerful move, a bold deal, a project no one expected, a public moment that drowns out the rumor entirely. Because you don't need to fight lies if your life becomes louder than them. Machiavelli understood that attention is a limited currency. If you give your attention to your enemies by defending yourself, you're spending your value in their economy. But if you withhold your attention and invest it only in power moves, strategic alignments, unexpected victories, or silence that radiates confidence, you reframe the entire story. Now here's another weapon Machiavelli would quietly embed: distraction by drama. Let's say an accusation gains traction. People are whispering. The air is thick with curiosity. Machiavelli wouldn't address the drama. He'd create a new one, a better one that steals the room. Because public attention is like a spotlight. It can only shine on one scene at a time. So he'd give them something else to gossip about, something calculated, something designed. He wouldn't fight the fire. He'd start a bigger one somewhere else and watch them chase that instead. It's the strategy of optical power. Whoever directs the crowd's gaze controls the narrative. That's why defending yourself is a trap. It means someone else already sees that spotlight. You're just dancing under it, trying not to burn. But Machiavelli knew the secret was to become the one controlling the light. The masters of power throughout history all shared this trait, a cold indifference to being misunderstood. They let history judge them, not the moment. They were fine being villains in the short term, because they knew that power isn't gained through consensus. It's gained through clarity of direction. And clarity requires silence, stillness, precision, not panic. So how do you put this into action today? You need to kill the reflex to respond. The second someone attacks you, pause, breathe, and instead of reacting, observe. What do they want? What image are they trying to paint? What outcome are they pushing for? Are they trying to lower your status? Extract an apology? Force you to appear weak? Once you see the why behind the attack, you've already won. Because now you can choose your response strategically or not respond at all. Maybe you post a picture smiling 2 days later, unfazed. Maybe you drop a project that forces everyone to say, "Damn, he's still winning." Maybe you leak information that redirects heat to someone else, all without ever mentioning the original smear. Every move must be cold, deliberate, deafening in silence. Because remember, power isn't protected by words. It's protected by mystery. When you defend yourself, you're explaining your position. But when you don't, you become the position. People don't question what's immovable. They just adjust to it. They orbit it. And in the silence you create, they start filling the gaps with stories. Some of those stories will paint you as a villain, but others will turn you into legend. And you want that. You want to polarize. You want to be either feared or fantasized, because the middle ground is where the powerless live, constantly explaining, constantly justifying, constantly pleading to be seen the right way. Machiavelli would rather be hated for strength than pitied for decency. So the next time someone drags your name through the mud, ask yourself, are you going to jump in after it? Or are you going to walk away and make your silence louder than their accusations ever could be? The kings who defended themselves were forgotten. The ones who didn't were remembered forever. Now comes the most dangerous layer of this power: weaponized indifference. Machiavelli didn't just avoid defending himself to protect power. He used the very absence of a response to flip power dynamics entirely. He knew that when someone attacks you and you refuse to engage, they become desperate. They escalate. They overcommit. Because nothing is more maddening than fighting someone who doesn't acknowledge the war. This is the predator's silence, the kind that makes your enemies start doubting their own senses. You need to understand something deep and brutal here. Most people who come at you don't want the truth. They don't want resolution. They want to pull you down to their level. The moment you argue back, you're not correcting them. You're joining them. That's the goal of many modern power games. Not to destroy you, but to make you ordinary, touchable, equal. Because when you're on the pedestal and they can't reach you, the only way they win is by making you stoop. But Machiavelli didn't stoop. He disappeared from reach. He let others scream while he played his game higher, colder, and smarter. And here's how he took it even further. He turned defense into offense without saying a word. Let's say someone accuses you of being heartless, manipulative, arrogant. The weak man rushes to say, "No, you misunderstood." The strong man builds an empire right in front of them and makes it undeniably impressive. That is Machiavelli's real revenge, success without explanation. Because here's the rule he operated by. Every second spent defending your name is a second not building your throne. He didn't have time to argue with peasants when he was aiming for crowns, but there's a deeper psychological trick here too. When you refuse to defend yourself, people assume one of two things. You're guilty and hiding something. Or you're untouchable and don't even consider it worth responding to. Now here's the Machiavellian twist. You want both. Yes, you read that right. You want people to think, maybe he's guilty, but damn, he doesn't seem to care. Because that combination creates fear. That's the posture of a man who doesn't ask for forgiveness. He acts and lets others calculate the risk of crossing him. When people don't know if you're clean or ruthless, they become cautious. And cautious people don't attack. They orbit. They whisper. They watch. But they don't confront. Because no one wants to be the one who triggers the monster they can't fully see. That's what you become when you stop defending. A myth. And Machiavelli always played better as a myth than a man. But what happens when someone publicly calls you out? When your reputation, your image, your career seems to hinge on what you say next? This is the moment the average person breaks. They think not responding will look like guilt. But Machiavelli knew the response is never about what's true. It's about what repositions power. So he'd do something very specific. He'd use symbolic dominance. A cold, calculated move that communicates strength without ever addressing the accusation. Maybe it's a promotion, a headline, a moment of luxury, a sharp, elegant photo with no caption, something that says, "While you talk, I build. While you whine, I win." And that stings more than any words ever could. Because nothing is more painful to an accuser than watching you rise unbothered. But Machiavelli also had a psychological trick for those who needed to say something. for those rare situations where absolute silence might look weak. Here's what he'd do. He'd make the response not about himself, but about principles. Instead of "I didn't do this," he'd say, "In this world, results speak louder than rumors." Instead of "I'm not the villain," he'd say, "Every great man is called a villain before he's remembered as a leader." He'd abstract the issue, turn it philosophical. He'd climb above the dirt and let everyone else fight below it. This tactic changes everything. You're no longer playing defense. You're setting the moral framing of the conversation. And the person who defines the frame wins. Even in Machiavelli's time, this game was brutal. Courts full of liars, nobles full of daggers behind their smiles. Yet those who endured weren't the best speakers. They were the best silencers. They knew when to speak in riddles, when to vanish, and when to come back with results so loud the accusations got drowned. So you want to live this? Here's what to burn into your brain. When you're attacked, don't defend, elevate. When they insult you, don't react, redirect. When they spread lies, don't argue, outperform. When they demand answers, own the silence, let it choke them. And never forget, when you don't defend yourself, you become terrifying. Because now they don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you'll do. They don't know what game you're playing. And nothing is more powerful than being unreadable. Machiavelli didn't want to be known. He wanted to be felt. And when your presence makes people second-guess their attacks before they even try, you've already won. And now we arrive at the final layer of Machiavelli's trick, the transformation from defenseless to untouchable. This is the point where your refusal to defend yourself no longer just protects your power, it creates it. Because silence, when mastered, becomes a signal, a psychological weapon, a message that says, "I am not here to be questioned. I am here to be watched." And those who know how to wield this silence become something greater than persuasive. They become inevitable. Machiavelli understood a truth most people ignore. Power isn't taken by explaining your intentions. It's taken by becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to. When you reach that level, you don't need to be liked. You don't even need to be understood. You simply need to be seen acting with confidence while others collapse under the weight of needing validation. That's the trick. You remove yourself from the emotional economy. From the guilt, the approval, the fake apologies, you become non-negotiable. Let's make it real. Imagine someone goes on a tirade about you publicly, a long message, a video, a smear. It's filled with lies, distortions, subtle attacks designed to chip away at your image. Now everyone's watching, waiting for your reaction. This is where most people spiral. They think, if I don't respond, people will believe them. If I don't defend myself, I'll lose everything. And so they write back. They explain, they justify, and in that moment, they shrink. Not because they're wrong, but because they just gave their power away. Now contrast that with what Machiavelli would do. Absolutely nothing. He'd let the silence burn. He'd let the public wait. And while they waited, he'd win. Quietly. Strategically. He'd align with more powerful allies. Drop something no one saw coming. Make moves that turned his enemies into non-factors. And then, if he ever did speak again, it wouldn't be to respond to the drama. It would be above it, beyond it. It would make people forget the insult ever happened. Because power doesn't come from proving people wrong. Power comes from proving them irrelevant. Machiavelli didn't waste energy fighting shadows. He walked through them. That's what you need to do. Now let's look at the long game. Defending yourself creates a short-term dopamine hit. People pat you on the back, say, "Don't worry, we know the truth," and for a moment, you feel vindicated. But that feeling dies quickly. Why? Because you trained the world to expect a reaction from you. You made yourself predictable. And predictable people are always easy to corner. But the Machiavellian player never gives the same answer twice because they never answer at all. They operate in a different rhythm. They move without warning. And because of that, the fear around them grows. The curiosity expands. And soon, even their enemies become hesitant to provoke them again. Not because they're scared of a verbal fight, but because they don't know what the retaliation might look like. This is power. And it begins the moment you stop trying to set the record straight. Because here's the final lesson. The record doesn't matter. The perception of your power does. And nothing amplifies that perception like stillness under pressure. That's when people say, "He must know something we don't. He must have something planned. He didn't react. What is he thinking?" And suddenly, the fear you didn't express becomes more powerful than anything you could have said. Now, here's your framework, the iron law to follow going forward. Never react from emotion. Ever. Never explain who you are. Prove it in results. Never answer a lesser player. Make them fight shadows. Never dilute your strength with clarification. Never let their words matter more than your silence. You are either building power or giving it away. Every time you speak, ask, am I reinforcing my legend or exposing my wounds? Because defending yourself is like pulling open your armor to show there's nothing underneath but fear. And Machiavelli? He never showed the inside. He let the world guess. And in that guessing, he built something far more terrifying than certainty. He built a reputation, one that couldn't be touched, couldn't be boxed in, couldn't be challenged without consequence. So let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. And you? Walk in silence. Walk with power. Let your results shake the ground louder than your voice ever could. Because in the end, the man who refuses to defend himself becomes a man no one dares attack again.